day, everybody, and thank you for tuning in. Welcome to another episode of TheSHIP, a podcast that explores the nature and the dynamics of relationships between mentors and mentees. TheSHIP serves as a platform for mentors to tell their stories about how they have navigated to where they are. We'll hear stories about their critical points or pivots, aided by those who mentored these mentors, helping them to discover their purpose. I'm your host, Gerard Luzangi, joined by my co-host today, Asante Malima. On this episode, we'll talk about Dada Maria Biswalo's story. Dada Maria is an educator, translator, and a writer. Majority of her experience as an educator has been spent teaching early elementary classes and working in school leadership with a focus on pedagogy and curriculum review. She has published books for kids, Kanga ya Mama. There's a Swahili and English versions of it. And there's also a new book coming out that would love to hear about it today. That if she can share that story with us today. Her dedication to education and the vision to bring other colleagues and women along is one of the many reasons we chose to invite her today to hear her thoughts. Looking forward to a wonderful discussion. Karibu sana Dad.
Karibu sana, karibu.
Sana for that glowing welcome. Thank you. Thank you.
Si unajua tena sisi wewe tunakuangalia kama mentor wetu katika nyanja nyingi, so we really appreciate your time to actually come over here.
Thank
So
you.
without further ado, let's just jump into it. Can you just tell us a little bit of yourself on what has been keeping you busy lately?
Yes. So like you said, I'm an educator and currently I am based in Denmark, actually in the southernmost island of Denmark, Kijijini.
Okay.
But it's a beautiful community down here.
Kijiji cha Ulaya.
Kijiji cha Ulaya. Kijijini bado. No, I'm based down here. We came down here with my family because there's a big project that is happening. They're building a tunnel connecting Denmark and Germany called the Fehmarn Belt. And so when my family got the opportunity to come down here, we were lured in with that project. And when we came, because it's a big project, there's a lot of international families coming in this direction. They opened up an international school. And me being an international educator, it kind of just, fell seamlessly into place after my family settled and I was ready to get my feet back into the classroom again. I got back to school. So currently I am teaching third graders and I'm also teaching 8th grade maths, which is a new thing for me, but I'm embracing change. And yeah, that's what I'm doing in that aspect. But obviously, me being who I am, I try to keep my mind fresh. And by doing that, like you said, I also write. And I started my journey of writing children's books. Actually, when I was in the Netherlands during the pandemic, I was teaching at an international school there in Delft. And the group of teacher and I, there were 4 of us and we said, you know what, we will read stories from our home country, to engage with the kids because we would do these recordings that we would post to students and then they would respond to the readings. And it was as I was reading doing one of my recordings of a favorite book of my children, actually, which is called Lala Salama, a Tanzanian lullaby. I posted it and one of the kids wrote back, who I didn't even know was born in Nairobi and grew up in Nairobi, saw a kanga and saw a baby carried in a kanga. So then that started that conversation of looking at, oh my gosh, I take it for granted all the time. Like for me, it's just part of, everyday life. And so I went back into the book and there was a kanga on every page, which is something I had not noticed in this children's book, but he had noticed it. And so then I did like a mini presentation after saying, this is what I do with the kanga, and I showed some personal pictures with them. And then during my lesson plan, because it really came out from a lesson, that's how the idea was born for my first book, because I always knew I wanted to write. I didn't know when to do it. And as you know, lots of people got inspired during the pandemic with all the stillness and the quiet and just
Yep.
time to really like, you've got no other opportunity or no choice really to but to be still. And so I channeled myself in that. And yeah, so doing book stuff and teaching and putting those two things together has really kept me busy in the last couple of years. So since 2021. And yeah, I've loved that journey because it's very different. It has taken me in directions that I never thought I would go into. But yeah,
okay,
that's
safi
what I'm
sana.
doing.
Sasa interesting pale umesema kwamba you are a teacher, or you teach math, and
Yes.
also you sound like you're into literature, and I don't really understand those two words. How do they collide, or how do you create like your nini nini uji?
We are not those things. No, so it's interesting. So Mimi, so when I graduated from high school, I graduated quite young, actually. I finished high school when I had just turned 17. And so my mom was like, chuo, sasa hivi hapana, And so, and she gave me the room and space. And of course, I had the privilege of trying all these different things in between. But I had the passing grades to pretty much go in any direction, whether it was in sciences or arts or whatever. But one thing, her advice was that, hey, if you're going to choose anything, do something that you want to wake up and go to even on your worst day. And that was a tough thing to reckon with at 17, trying to figure it all out because, I wanted to be a TV presenter, and, So I went and I asked to intern at Clouds for a bit. I did some projects with the World Bank with HIV/AIDS youth. And then I did stuff with conservation because I was living in Iringa at that time with Ruaha National Park and the big water crisis at that time with all the rice farms. I got involved with that. And then I loved history. I was a bit all over the place. And I got to work with a PhD student who was doing his thesis on Mwalimu Nyerere. So I was his translator and videographer, and we went to Butiama and Nini. So I tried all these things. But then I got so tired after a year and a half of kind of exploring. I came back home, and my mom's a teacher. So I came back home and she's like, Maria, you can't stay in bed every single day, just reading. Njoo darasani kwangu. Nisaidie, kuna mtoto mmoja who I think you two will, connect. And I went into their classroom, and then I got my calling. I loved being around kids. And then, of course, with that, I was like, what are my two directions? In my little 18-year-old mind, I was like, I can either be a doctor, a pediatrician, or I can go into education. And education was my thing. And it's funny because my family is full of academicians. And so I never saw myself wanting to be a teacher, but here I am. And when you say, math, I've always loved math. Like math to me came easily, even when I was in school. And everybody was always like,
how? Was it like,
why aren't you doing math? And I'm like, I don't know. Like, I enjoy it. It's like puzzles. For me, math is like a big puzzle, and I love solving. But I also love literature, and I love the art and the knowledge of seeing how language develops, or how children learn how to read, or making connections like that. And so it just happened. And
I'm a little bit curious hapo umesema umemaliza high school at the age of 17. I would like to dive in a little bit hapo, labda tubadilishe channel tuende kwenye Kiswahili.
Ndio.
Bongo ulisoma wapi?
Aha. Sasa mimi nilisoma kwenye shule za kimataifa tangia, nadhani nilianza actually Mlimani chekechea, in my green and yellow, for all of the people from Mlimani, hey. Chekechea pale nilianza, alafu mama akawa anafundisha Aga Khan na kaka zangu kusoma Mzima. Kwa hiyo nikaenda Aga Khan, then we moved to Arusha. And when we moved to Arusha, mama was out of the country, so Baba put us into Meru Primary. But when Mama got back, we then went to St. Constantine's, which is a Greek school, but an English medium school. And then after that, I went to ISM Arusha campus, International School Moshi, and then I went to the Moshi campus. And so, but I mostly went through international schools, and I actually graduated from an international school in Zambia, an all-girls international school, because I begged my mom that I wanted to have a boarding school experience. And so, yeah, and along the way, I think moving from school to school and jumping, you know, other schools, I think I skipped a couple of classes somewhere.
That was going to be my next question. Like, okay,
Yeah.
you answer.
Because you were like 17. But yeah, no. So I skipped a couple of classes in between, and I seemed to be able to cope with the academic side of things. And so, yeah, we just rolled with it. My parents were teachers. They didn't fret. They were never really worried in that aspect. So,
yeah, that's fantastic. That's amazing. Yani penya kila sehemu wanaposema wenyewe.
That exposure, yeah.
Yeah.
Sasa nzuri sana. Sasa, given that you have been traveling and you are a woman with so many talents, when and how do you, or whether you can recall it, when were you introduced to the concept of mentorship?
Mentorship. So on a personal level, like me being mentored, that was in college. There was one of my professors at university. We just clicked, and we were talking about literacy and literature, really. And she was just fascinated. She was just like, who is this kid? This African kid who just wants to talk about everything and asking all the questions in class. Because Mimi, I'm also I'm a type of learner that I'd rather discuss something and I will remember it. But give me a textbook, afu niambie tisoma, ukafanye mtihani, I'll struggle. And so I'm the one who answers and drives conversations. And luckily, university classrooms in the US gives you space for that. And so it was in my children's literature class where we were taught how to connect literature, or how literature can help inform your practice. And of course, and I went to school at the University of New Orleans. And so this is the South. And that was also, post Katrina, Hurricane Katrina. So there was a lot going on in school reforms. So we were working sometimes in very difficult and dire public schools, because we had to do our student teaching or our practice in public schools. Kwa hiyo, how do you connect with a kid from like super low social economic income, who has been through this traumatic event, and then you coming in and telling them, oh yeah, you need to get this test score for English, for language? Why should I read Mark Twain? Why should I read, anything, for that matter? So we had to learn how to find texts and literature that would connect on a certain human aspect. And that has always stayed with me, that I could find books. And this was even before the huge wave now of trying to find characters that, reflect you or reflect your identity. But for her, I could always go to her and be like, even after the course, I'd be like, hey, Dr. Pat, I have this student and I know he's brilliant, but I need to break through, and then she's like, okay, what are their interests? What is it? And she would come up with books, and she'll take me. We had a section of children stories and novels and things. And she'd be like, let's look through these. And she'll hand me a few. And that to me was proper mentorship, because I didn't feel like our connection on a professional even level, even at that time, she was teaching me to be a professional, that the door stayed open. And she was willing, as long as, of course, I give her ample time, that, hey, do you have time? Can we do this? And she always showed up for me. And that was my first personal, when someone mentored me. And I still remember she was also my marshal at graduation. And at that time, you were not allowed to decorate your caps. But I had a Tanzanian flag on top. And I was trying to walk like this. I'm not the tallest person, by the way. So I was like, and she just came up to me. She's like, don't worry, I'll walk next to you until you. So in essence, like she really, she taught me that idea of being a supporter of someone who is thirsty for something, or someone who has shown passion or interest in anything that you do, to be honest. It could be shoes, sure, let's be sneakerheads together and talk about that. But for me, it was her and literature and connection to people on this level. And I loved that. So yeah.
Kwa hiyo math sasa came from a completely different, I guess, mentor.
Math was a self-driven thing. I can tell you that. No, math was a completely self-driven thing. I didn't have a mentor. My mom actually hated math. She's like, Yamani Maria.
I see. Yani hapo Jihad umemkuna upozungumzia math, kwa sababu mimi ndio mwalimu wangu wa math. Kwa hiyo yule Azania ile wewe na stuck ni uko namtafuta Gerald, bwana Gerald hapo tunaanzia hapa. Pythagoras theory mbona haieleweki? Kwa hapo kuzungumzia math, I hope hatutokuwa tunarudi kwenye hiyo math conversation.
And to be honest, though, going back to that, though, although she was not like a clear mentor, it was a heavy. My degree ilikuwa ni bachelor's of science and not arts in education, because it's so research and based, and there was a lot of I had to take so many math classes, to be honest. Now I loved it because sababu when we were teaching how to teach math, you had to break it down, and I was one of those kids who, yes, I did good in math, lakini ukiniuliza nikuelezee ili jibu nimelipataje, the way I did it, it's not the way you did it.
Get it out.
It just came to my mind.
But when I took those classes, I remember they were teaching us how to look at numbers from a different base. So when we were teaching math, now I'm getting a bit geeky. We had to work with base 5 instead of base 10, a system that, of course, is ingrained. We know how to do that. And all of a sudden, it's like, wait, stop. How do I explain this to a second grader? Or, relationships between decimals and percentages and fractions. What? But in a different base. And kwa hiyo inakufanya wewe to really be clear and to synthesize information. And I think that made it even more exciting kwangu mimi, kwa sababu I'm just fascinated. Like I said, I just love math. I think it's logical in a lot of ways. And now, so even now when I'm teaching my students, that's always the thing that I come back to. And because even the other day we finished doing progression tests with my older ones, the 8th graders, and they're like, but Miss Maria, when will I ever use vectors and blah, blah, blah? Why? What? You have to make, and I said, math comes at you even when you're not thinking that you're doing math.
Right.
So when you're making a quick estimation, you're automatically thinking mathematically without really saying this is math, because it's not an equation and you're balancing it out, but you're like, I have this amount of time, this is the distance, do I walk today or do I take my bike, whatever it is, you're thinking mathematically at that point. When you're making decisions to cross the road, measuring, estimation distance, this is a real life skill. Yes, at the end of the day, I want you to transfer it on paper, but yeah, and when I teach them, I say, Skiliza, kila mtu looks at things comes with a different foundation. And we got to build on that. And in that way, you have to connect it to real life. So even if you forget, I'm like, just think of a story, make up a story.
Right.
You can, half the time you can figure out the math. Of course, trigonometry, but yeah, so that's just a passion.
Yani, mi naongezea tu hapo kidogo. Mama yangu naye ni mwalimu.
Ndi-
tena wahesabu. Sasa, the funny thing is, my mom, she taught throughout like standard 1 all the way to standard 7, alafu wakampromote kuwa mwalimu wa walimu, kwa hiyo akaenda wilayani.
Yeah.
Sasa, one of the things ambazo, in fact, when I was in Tanzania this last time, nilikuwa napiga naye story, nikaanza kumuuliza, sasa mama, yani wewe uliweza vipi kufundisha watoto wadogo mpaka walimu na walimu? Sasa, this was the first time I saw my dad actually chime in. I said, bwana, mama yako ana mbinu za kufundishia ni no.
And it's true.
Sasa nikaanza kumdodosa, okay, hebu naomba unieleweshe kidogo hizo mbinu za watoto ulizokuwa unafundisha. What was so unique about them? Akaniambia, unajua watoto especially wa Kitanzania, umeona, wana tatizo la kutafuta connection between the subject, the topic, na jinsi gani unavyoitumia on a day-to-day basis. Umeona bwana?
Sio Tanzania tu.
Sasa again, I'm gonna tap into the same momentum that you had. Sasa akawa ananiambia hivi, yeye alivyokuwa anafundisha kujumlisha, kutoa, kugawanya, kuzidisha, alikuwa anatengeneza duka darasani. Sema, we're gonna have a shopkeeper and we're gonna have people coming in and purchase stuff out of there. Kwa hiyo mtu anakuja anaela, yani ni exercise kabisa, watoto wanakata nani madaftari yao, wanaweka hela $5 sijui $10, yani kama monopoly fulani.
Monopoly.
Kwa hiyo wanakwenda wananunua, kwa that kicks in kwamba $5 wanataka kununua mawe sijui chungu za $2, anarudishia $3. So that's how she actually got them to be very engaging and really understand them from that first person perspective. Kwa hiyo I can really see mtu anatoka shule anasema kwamba, how am I going to use vectors? Hizo calculus nitazitumia wapi mimi sasa?
Vectors is a good one. Vectors, hata tuingia sisi college kwenye complex mathematics zile, watu wanaanza kuuliza this multivariable or 12 order differential equation tatumika wapi, ambao pretty much ukiishusha inakuwa kama ni matrix ile. Sasa mimi, to me it was really interesting. Siku moja mwalimu akakuja akawa anaelezea, akasema, unajua ndege inavyonyanyuka ile equation, ile ndege inavyonyanyuka au inavyoland, that's a 12th order differential equation ambayo inabidi we simplify into this, and then that determines engine ifanye kazi kiasi gani iweze ku reach altitude fulani. Basi hapo raha unakuwa
love that. Yani wanapendega ni ukiwapa story, ukiwaambia hivi, imagine like, yani. And once you do explain it, wanaanza kutengeneza hizo, connections, and you're like, and you see it click. Yani kuna wengine ni immediately like, I got it, I see that, and you start giving it to them. Hata use it, but tuna review your percentages. Do you know what I use? I use shopping and sales. I said, hey, Miss Maria, when she's going shopping, she goes in the sales section first. And I figure it out how quickly I can figure out a percentage of the, original price and this. And they were like, we do that all the time. And no, it's a quarter, it's 25%. Yani, vitu kama hivyo. So you have to bring it to life. And I think that's why I love doing what I do. Whether it's teaching math or language, is making those connections and seeing those aha moments for them when they're also making the connection. So
do you attribute that to also to similar to the aspect of storytelling, kwamba ile ni kama pale hiyo ni unampa mtu a story fulani relating to a subject, na mtu, what they say, people remember stories than they remember things. Kwa hiyo okay.
And especially even younger kids, for them, like if they're moving. So we were talking about perimeters with my third graders, and they're like, perimeter? And I was like, yeah, it's the distance around. And they kept confusing it with area. Yeah, man. Michezo, who walked around. It's like, okay, walk like a tiger, prowling around its cage. That is the perimeter. But once it starts running around in between, that's the area it's running around. All of a sudden, like, really? But before they were interchanging the two, because it's a bit of an abstract concept to little ones. But yeah, you have to make it into a story and say, now you make up your own story about it. And they started, it's like, oh yeah, if I take 10 steps, to the right, then to the left. But all of this then becomes, it's a story.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sasa nafikiri Asante hapa bwana, mimi aliniambia kitu kimoja, either mimi nitauliza hili swali au Asante anaweza akauliza hili swali, lakini nimesikia tu dodosa kwamba Asante alikutafuta umfundishe jinsi ya kutengeneza vitabu vya watoto.
Naam. Kweli.
Sasa hebu tupe uhondo kama mentor, wewe ulimpa madini gani yani?
Madini gani? Unajua mimi mwenyewe yani safari yangu ya kuwa mwandishi, like I said, nilianza during the pandemic, so YouTube was my university. And the World Wide Web was, my resource. So there was a lot of information out there. Lakini pia the information that was out there at that time was more geared to the American experience. So they were talking about this, and I'm looking at it, I'm like, okay, but I'm in Europe. Does that work for me? So I had to go through all these different stages of research. I am also mimi ni mzalendo fulani hivi. Even when I was going through my research, I wanted to engage other Tanzanians. And so, of course, the illustrator who illustrated, she's a friend, she's Tanzanian. At that time, she was based in Beijing. Kwa hiyo, and we had to navigate the difference in time. And then I wanted to actually publish or print the book in Tanzania. But those conversations, ended up falling through because I was not on the ground. And unajua tena, the reality of things back home, if you're not there following up on a close basis, then conversations just kind of fizzled. And I said, that's fine. It's not going to deter me. But I did a lot of research. And since then, though, I tried to then tweak it and to see what are key things from my research that I could still make relevant to someone else who is not based out of the US. So I've had not just Asante that I've spoken to people in Tanzania, because then you get, DMs, people being like, oh, but how did you do it? You're self-published, and why aren't you with a big publishing house and all of this? And I said, well, at that time, I wanted to do it my way. And I didn't want the confines of having to wait, because if you're going with agents or publishing houses, then you have to follow those rules and channels, which are completely different from when you're doing it all by yourself. So yeah, I tried to share, and everyone's experience is very different. So whatever I talk to Asante about might not be what I will talk to you, Gerald, if you came up to me and said, hey, I want to write a book, because it's okay. So are you starting from scratch? What is your, what is the bigger picture? What is the bigger purpose? Because for me, my purpose at the time was that, like I said, I had started telling the story that, I read this book, but then I also ran out of books that were age appropriate, but culturally relevant to Tanzania to share with my students in the Netherlands. And that's when I was like, oh, okay. Like I always knew kuna ufinyu, like but this is when it really was blaring. And so my purpose came on trying to then do my part, to be proactive and see, how do I close that gap of having, culturally relevant Tanzanian stories that were for early literacy. Make vitabu na hadithi tunavyo, riwaya za kutosha, but tunaanza, it's as if we skip this whole generation, alafu ghafla boom, unaingia darasa la ngapi au form 1 unaanza kuambia hewa kina Shaban Robert na kina nani na nani, lakini huku chini you're like, but how do I create that love for literature, love for reading, or just giving the space kwamba mtoto shika kitabu, soma. Maana watoto wengi saa nyingine hata kwenye mashule, maktaba zetu ambazo labda watu wamekuwa funded, wameletewa vitabu, zinafungiwa na kufuli na nini, and this is even at a higher level. So I said, okay, my interest is here. So even my experience right now, I couldn't tell you about writing long length novels, but I can definitely tell you, like for children's stories, this is what I did. And from there, as well as once I opened that, nasema nilikuwa na uthubutu, manake nadhani wengi, that's the big jump that you have to overcome, because it's an idea that's living, you know, in your mind, but then you have to birth it to the world, and then hey, whoever is there and that reception, it's nerve-wracking. Lakini pia mimi, I said, okay, it is what it is, here we go. And I was embraced by such a great community of writers as well. Kwa hiyo sasa kuna, all of a sudden, nikaanza kukutana na kuwa connected na waandishi wengine wa hadithi za watoto za Kiswahili. Nikasema, nyinyi mmekuwa wapi? Mimi natafuta vipati. But then, yeah, you know, so then all of a sudden they're like, tuko huku. And I'm like, whoa. And then, yes, it's not a huge pool, but it's a pool. You know, I didn't feel so alone anymore. I was like, okay, great, you know. Na all of us were also kind of this journey. Wengi wao walikuwa wanaandika na ku-self-publish pia. Kwa hiyo, that was also a nice place to have conversations and exchange ideas. Oh, what worked, what didn't work? Oh, did you try this? Did you not try this? Kwa hiyo tukawa tumetengeneza community yetu ndogo pia ya support at that point. And so that's how, and for me, I always say my door is always open. Yani, you have no idea how many people have just ask, you know. Saa nyingine watu wanaogopa hata kuuliza swali, wanaweza kadhani sijui nini. Mimi, listen, I'll share, and what you do with it, go ahead. But because the information, we could all be reading the same thing, we could all listen to the same podcast, but the takeaways will be completely different. And that's where I'm like, Mimi, I'm not worried about new competition, because it's not about the competition. It's about creating access and awareness and growth in that particular, you know, niche in a way, or in that. And I don't want it to be a niche, you know. I want our kids to.
I said, and Maria, you're a great teacher. Mimi, I really appreciate it, how you really welcomed me and mentored me in that process, and thank you for that. But I think also to add to that, your vision of how to bring other colleagues, particularly women, in your journey, to me, it was truly inspiring, because it shows that, I mean, you really are trying to address the key problem, ambayo, yani, to get other women, to get other people involved. And in this particular case, kuna kagap hapa ambacho umeka identify hapo, kutoka mtu katika early level, na now anafika secondary school, anaambia soma kuli, you know. Okay, I mean, what happened between hapa to build?
It's true. And sasa hivi a lot of conversation as well back home in Tanzania about, you know, building a reading culture. But how do you build a reading culture without resources? Na sasa tuanze kusubiria hivyo vitabu viletwe na nani, au hizo hadithi ziandikwe na nani? Yes, we are an oral storytelling culture, but that doesn't mean that we cannot preserve those stories. Manake ata wakina Aesop's na kina, you know, Anansi the spider, those are oral stories that have been written down, so we can retell. Kwa hiyo hapo, kama wewe sijui una hadithi za Kijita au za Kikerewe za nini ambazo ungependa, I wish I did that. Kuna hadithi ambazo mimi mama alikuwa ananiambia, you know, hadithi nyingi huwa zina nyimbo katikati, basi naonaga raha. My kids love it when mama is telling the stories, but I'm like, how do I capture that essence? Unaona? Sasa tunataka tusibaki kwenye tusibaki nyuma. We also want to preserve for the futures to come. Manake sasa kama wote tutaishia mjini Dar es Salaam, hatujawahi hata kupanda pantoni. Sijui, yani, even talking about that journey ya kupanda pantoni, ya kununua au ya kupanda ndege na zile ndoo za samaki zile.
Matenga ya kuku.
That is something that someone could write about. Ambayo, again, it will preserve a part of our culture, because hata mimi nakumbuka wakati kwa dogo bado sato zinaletwa huko ATC, wanaenda airport kwenda kupokea, you know. So all those things, and watu wengi saa ingine they think it's harder than it needs to be. Of course, the writing, you need to have a support group ambao watu wanaweza read through, give you feedback, sema hapa fanya hivi, lakini everybody has a story to tell. That's what I tell. I even tell my students this when we're doing like free writing. I said, we all have a story within us. You just have to find that one thing that you want to start with. And then from there.
Yani, hapo umeniongezea kingine. My niece, she's very smart. Na ana tatizo hilo kwamba she's got so many choices and she has like some struggles sometimes, but she writes as well.
Yeah.
Sasa nikamuomba ashare nani zake anazoandika. When I looked at those manuscripts and I was thinking like, how come the characters, they're all white?
That part.
I really think what you're saying here, it taps into that. We don't have novels that we can share with little kids when they're growing up before they reach that secondary school ambao unafundishwa Shaban Robert sijui Kuli, umeona hatuna hapa kuwajenga, tunaanza kutumia vitabu vya nje, kwa hiyo we lose ability for the imagination to happen in Swahili, umeona na yani sorry.
And there's so much, no. And just on that track, there's so much research as well, kwamba how do kids respond to literature? They respond to something that they can connect with. They have a basis. Their comprehension of that context is so much bigger, Yani. And I saw that when I wrote the book, and then, I had the privilege to come home or to go home and share my story. And of course, it was a bit difficult to get into public schools, but I got into schools that had predominantly Tanzanian kids. And when I read the book, yani, kwanza kusikia tu neno kanga, they were like, what? Kanga, ndio. But it was that already leveled the playing field. Because imagine these kids, maybe, they're at an English medium school, myself included, the schools I went to, the stories I read, they were all a Eurocentric or an American viewpoint. And yes, I started to slowly internalize and to understand it, but some nuances I never got to. But mtoto Tanzania kumwambia kanga, immediately they have their own emotions and you want them to connect to a certain level to that. And then then the bigger conversation happens. And so, like it's a call. I'm passionate about what I do. I'm passionate about kids loving, because all kids love stories. Wapi. Na kama ulivyosema, your niece, tell her, or like, where is she based again? And that's the other thing. We're talking about diasporan kids, and we're also talking about Tanzanian kids on the ground.
This is Tanzanian in Tanzania. That's what I'm saying. It's
and
super
that's
surprising
even
to
sad. No, it's not even surprising though. Anyway, I totally get it, because I even the history I learned at some of the schools, it was like, the War of Roses. Why do I need to know about the War of Roses? Like, we didn't learn about the Maji Maji War in depth at that time. This is at an international school, where you would think, oh, maybe let's, tap into the local, like in Indio Hivyo. So there's definitely a lot more in that, but I would tell her to think about what happens at home, or even when she goes to Bibi, to see Bibi, what happens there that's different. My kids love going to Bibi. They tell you, Mama, at Bibi's house, sometimes there's no electricity. It goes off. Mambo ya umeme, sijui. They love DSTV. Any DSTV them is like it's like, wait, we have to watch the commercials, and I'm like, child, like vitu ambavyo ni wao wanaviona, and then it's like, sijui tulikatikiwa maji at some point, kwa kuna shortage. She's like, we had to take like showers from the bucket and boil the water, and
adventures,
is their thing. And but so my son wrote a story about, visiting Bibi, and I'm like, man, I'm waiting to publish that. It was such a different, life for him. It was not normal, but it was also like every part of it was exciting. It was like, that's not a problem. And kila mtu around are like, watoto wako sasa wataweza kweli? Mbona? I'm like, Waswahili kwanza, wewe wape tu ugali, the rest will fall into place.
So just to add to that, I think that's super interesting, especially from the context that watoto wanaokuwa kule nyumbani kwa huku, as mama, as mwalimu, una ushauri gani on how to mentor our kids as they grow in an environment huko abroad? Of course kuna zile pressures mbalimbali ambazo wanakutana nazo, na sisi kama wazazi ambao pengine tumekulia nyumbani lakini sasa hivi tunaishi huku, we are also in the process of learning on this new environment, how to navigate through. Kwa watoto una advice gani in terms of like, okay, I think it's really fantastic that you have started this work among many people that are putting these books, that the beauty of it, there's Swahili version and English version in our huku. In addition to that, what other things do you think we could do as wazazi kuwasaidia watoto kuadapt haya mazingira ya huku nje? It's a very loaded and broad question, but take it.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. But what I can tell you what I do. And it might work, might not work, but this is just how I've always parented my children. I had them when we were in Tanzania. Na tulihama Tanzania when the oldest was 5 and the younger one was 3. So even to them, home is still Tanzania. Mara nyingi wakisema home, najua kwamba ni wanaongelea Tanzania. Lakini tulivyohama pia, I made a point to not stop talking about home, being intentional with the language I use, being intentional with making connections and keeping those connections with people back home. And
kwa
also
wanaongea Kiswahili na Kiingereza.
Wana lugha 4 sasa hivi. Wanasoma Kidanish pia. Wanaongea Kidanish, Kiingereza, Kiswahili na Kijerumani. Baba yao ni Mjerumani. So there is that aspect kwamba I try to make sure, and if I can find community where I am. Imagine in my little village, I managed to find an East African community. Because Waswahili tupo ukitafuta. And there were also people who were kind of like, wait, we're literally in a village. It's not sio wengi. We spot each other like, there's a Black person. And it was funny because then the lady happened to be Kenyan, and then somebody reached out because of the book, and she's Tanzanian doing her PhD down here, and boom, and she has kids around the same age as mine. Kwa hiyo kuna hiyo support pia, wakiona mama akifurahi, tuna invite watu over, tunapika vyakula vyetu. Sio kwamba I don't, because mimi watoto wangu could eat ugali dagaa Monday to Monday, and I'm not eating ugali dagaa Monday to Monday. Kwa hiyo I make it a thing, and of course you have to ration your portions. Kila kutoka nyumbani, mtu anaenda, it's like, hey, niletee basi. But you know, but that kwamba I don't let that slide, and I make it meaningful. I make sure kwamba our culture is preserved somehow through language, through also our actions, so we still have certain core values, familiar values that are tied to our culture. Na lugha na nini tunaongea humu ndani as much as we can. So nyingine unaongea Kiswahili, unajibia Kiingereza, lakini mambo yanaenda tu. Because when we go back home, I know it takes 2-3 days. Wanaanza kuswitch back to Kiswahili. Umeona? Na wale watoto wa kitaa wakija kucheza kwa bibi ni bibi wa watoto wote. Because I said my mom's a teacher, so her house is always full of kids. Kwa hiyo yani, and allowing, and again I said, you know, I come from a place of privilege where I can say, okay, we try to go home often. If not once a year, you know, once every 2 years, you know, but we try to make sure kwamba hawasahau walikotoka.
Sasa hapo nataka niongezea hapo kitabu ambacho unakiandika sasa hivi kijacho, itakuwa na characters kama Pendo au itakuwa Pendo part 2? Like how is that coming along?
So at the moment, I have other stories written, as all authors do. We have manuscripts kama zote. But the next one is going to be the story of my little character. She's going to get a name, and obviously the name is out there. The character's name is Pendo. But the story is going to be about the naming traditions in Tanzania. So it's going to tie into that. And of course, I will pull very much into my own tribe, Wajita.
Okay.
So look, I'm giving you guys like more than insider. Nobody knows.
I love it. I love it already. We can talk about names anytime here.
No,
I got so many
but
stories about
looking
Wajita names.
into so again, of course, it's gonna be still very child friendly. Starting, my target age is still about 0 to 5. So something that kids can understand, kids can pull through, but it will start that conversation about naming traditions. And I think that's where my big pull is on as well, kwamba I want to provide opportunities for Tanzanian parents to have conversations with their kids about these things. Kwa sababu watu wengine siku hizi wanaweza toka dhani uliibuka ukaitwa hiki au hiki. And it's still that way. Yes, if you like that particular name and it's your favorite, sure. But it has a meaning. You chose that. But also to tap kwamba, lakini watu wengine wanaitwa sijui Jumanne kwa nini? Au wengine sijui anaitwa Nyachiro kwa nini? Mwingine, all of these things, kompa, how does that happen? And then of course, just like with the Kanga book, I have a blurb, both in English and Kiswahili. The Kiswahili version has a blurb, the English version has a blurb as to what the Kanga is. And so this will have like a little blurb about naming traditions in Tanzania. So of course, I also had to do quite a lot of research and go into a lot of that. Lakini, I loved the process as well. Kwa sababu na mimi nikajifunza na mengine. Of course, I knew the general aspect. Then you have to also synthesize that information. And then when you think about it, naming traditions are worldwide. So that is something that little kids, even non-Tanzanians, would be able to connect with. Kwa hiyo, I'm introducing them to something that is very personal and Tanzanian, but something that any family can easily identify. It's like, how did I get my name? How did you get your name? So yeah.
It also initiates that discussion and because you sometimes find even adults watu mtu mzima kabisa unamwambia okay jina lako ni hili, what's the reason behind that? I don't know. No, right? So in this case, it really brings it back to the origin, and then having that dialogue between what Wazima now Toto. I think that's really fantastic. Looking forward to that book.
So, and you get to meet her family, hopefully. So it's a bit of a mix of all of this. It's about naming traditions, but also about family. So she will have some supporting characters, to tell her story.
Sasa umesema ulifanya research kidogo. Biswalo maana yake nini?
Sijui. And doesn't that happen all the time when you do research, you look outwards and then you forget to look inwards?
Sasa nyinyi wajita wewe Luzangi manake nini?
Luzangi. Oh, really? I can tell you.
Tell me.
Sure. I'll go. So Luzangi comes from something is called Majangi. So Majangi, these are the type of it's kind of like a plantation that you find across the lake area. Kwa hiyo ni majani ambayo unayapata katika ukingo wa Ziwa Victoria. Sasa again, watu wetu tunajua kutoka maeneo hapo. Kwa hiyo Luzangi, in fact, Wakelewe wataita ni Luzangi, lakini Wajita ni Lujangi. Kwa hiyo realistically, my name should be Gerald Lujangi. Lakini kwa sababu mzee amekulia Ukelewe, that's how we get the Z in our thing.
Got it. I said that's really awesome.
I'm telling you, that whole dynamic of coming from the mainland to the island and Yeah, it's beautiful. Kuna familia nyingi ambazo wanakuambia kabisa jina limebadilika kwa sababu ya hiyo
move ile.
yeah.
Ndio.
Yeah.
Now I'm gonna do my research. I'm gonna come back.
You're not alone, man. Ukiniuliza mimi malima sijui. Na mimi nakuwa najua asante. Lakini malima bado sijui.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's switch gears a little bit here.
Yeah.
For mtu ambaye anaanza and someone who looks up to you as a woman or role model, how do they prepare themselves into their journey to become like someone as you are?
Oh, that's hard to answer. That's a tough question because I also say that your community and your environment plays a huge part, or at least it did in my family. My family, they're strong believers of education and the power that education has to open doors. And not just like, oh, you went to kapata na PhD na nini. It's not about the level of education. It's just the exposure to education that will give you access, or it will open doors to certain spaces. And so I also say that, coming from a place of privilege, that I did get a certain type of education and I was able to go to university. But what I would say is, if you believe in something, no one should knock you down, whether you have a piece of paper that says you can do this or you can't do this. Because sababu, if you look at my journey, career-wise, I've done things that my degree, yes, it played a part, but it was so disconnected. Yani, like I mentored and created a course for, college Tanzanian university students who were trying to work in intercultural spaces. So then we were talking about that had nothing to do with my formal, education for elementary school, for special needs or anything like that. But I remember I saw the ad and I was like, oh, that sounds really cool. I sent in my CV and the person kind of responded and they were a bit hesitant. And I was like, do you have time for a coffee? Yani uthubutu fulani ambao mimi, I think it was also instilled in us. In my family, the girls, we were always pushed even harder than the boys to study, because it said, listen, once you know your self-worth and once you know what your path is, whatever that path is going to be, no one can push you around. And that's why I'm saying, it's like, so whether it's from formal education or not, when you have that self-worth and hey, I know what I'm doing, whether it's through experience, it's through just being janja and being innovative, because a lot of things get born out of innovation. And I think sa nyingine bongo, we really downplay that aspect, that you don't have to be, John Kisomo in order to toboa, you really just have to have that will and that nerve to say, okay, I'm going to give it a shot, and block out the naysayers. Na ukiamini maneno ya wengine hauta anza chochote. They will always put you down somehow. Kuna a few that are going to support you, but a lot will be like, wataanza kuweka caution. Sasa umeshafikiria na hiki? I'm like, oh, right now I actually just called to be supported and you to say, go girl. But but really I would say just believe in whatever it is that you're gonna try, and hopefully you have a good support system, good tribe that's got your back, but not just the ones who will just champion you and say yes, but the ones who will also question you and ask you to think critically, ask you to think bigger than you even thought, because that was what some of my friends and my circle came in and they were like, have you tried this? Why haven't you done this? And I'm like, oh, you're right. I didn't think about it. Oh, I didn't think I could. And then all of a sudden I tried it. So that's what I would say. And as women, I also think that you should always be a girl's girl. And what I mean is that see the potential in your fellow women. Like the sisterhood that I have with so many people has been because I've seen something, they've seen something in me. I mentored a student who's now gotten her master's and I was applying for her PhD, and I'm so excited for her. But I remember she was fresh out of UD coming, for a job interview, and she was so nervous. And I just told her, hey, calm down. We're just having a conversation. And from there, I saw that it was just the nerves, but I also think the preparedness back home sometimes, like to go into interviews, wamezoea kuandika mtihani for an interview, to go in and you writing your whole, I don't care about your education. I want to know I want to know what's not written down here. Tell me about you and what you can bring to the table, and but from there, she's just blossomed, and she's also then, so whenever she writes, she's like, I'm so sorry, Dada Maria, I need another letter of recommendation. I'm like, where are we writing? What, so that kind of, that's what I'm saying. And it's so important as well to have that sort of outlook, because women are doing such incredible things out there. And I know men and brothers are too. And we are appreciative when you give us the space and you also, give us that support. But I want to see it become more consistent among women in the community.
Love it. I love it. And I think what I really like about what you said, Nile, about knowing your self-worth. I think we need to hone in on that as we mentor other people, or in your case, women, kwa sababu, I think sometimes people don't understand when somebody is coming to criticize you. Sometimes that criticism is coming from because of their own insecurities. This is nothing to do with you.
Exactly.
And so once you know your self-worth, you can't be pushed around by anything. You're like, okay, I hear you, thank you, but I'm going.
I'm staying, the course. It's true. And yeah, it's true. And I love that I have been able to have a good circle that can support that. And I have been able to support others, and wrapping it all up again, like especially in the realm of international education, you don't see a lot of people of color, you don't see a lot of Black people, African people. And so in a lot of spaces, I'm the only one, it's the Black and African, teacher at this school. And that also, it's nerve-wracking sometimes, because Yamani, because sometimes all eyes can be on you, but to also tell people, just embrace it and just be you. I never tried to be anything else but Maria, and that comes from knowing yourself and what you can bring to the table. And I think that was also something that I was super intentional about when I was back home, where I worked, when we were looking for assistants for classes and things like that. I was always like, all right, you know what? There are Tanzanian educators out there. I know this. Like, we're going to actively look for them. Now, you can go through interview after interview, and yes, you'll get one or two, but then you're like, yes, I got one or two that I can grab onto, who I hope can also then take up that space. And there've been a few that have, and that to me is, I don't know, more fulfilling than anything, because, mara nyingi, you walk into these spaces and you don't see teachers who look like you. So all of a sudden, you become to other yourself and your own culture. Like you were saying, the story characters in your niece's stories, why weren't they Tanzanian kids? Or is it because she didn't see them in the storybooks and didn't hear stories that reflected her? Lakini, now imagine having I have one child who's from Ghana in my class. She's Kenyan and Ghanaian, and she loves the fact that, we can sit and be like, did you have fufu and ugali this weekend? I did, but things like where other kids are like, huh, what's that? And then we start, but there's that sense of belonging, and in this space of international education that sometimes can feel a bit bear. So yeah.
Saza, I have one tricky question. Given the age and times that we live right now,
Yep.
ebooks versus hardcover for
Ooh.
non-English languages,
Yep.
which do you think will prevail, or which do you prefer better than the other?
So for me, it's a personal preference. I prefer a book, a physical book, but research also shows that when you're touching something and you're manipulating it, so turning the pages, being able to flip back and forth, just interacting with something tangible helps you to retain the information. And so ebooks have their space, I say, but preference-wise and what backs up the the research and learning and memory and all is something that is physical and in your hands. And they're expensive. I must say books are expensive. But if you find a way, there's like secondhand places and watu ambao mko kwenye diaspora, you've got libraries, use them, utilize them and make it a habit pia, yani kwamba mnaenda leo we're going to the library. Leo we go to the bookstore. I used to do that with my boys hata tulivyokuwa Tanzania. Hamna maduka ya vitabu vya watoto mengi, lakini bado we used to make it a thing. We go in and it's like, all right, you're allowed to choose one. Jamani, kitabu kimoja kwa mwezi unaweza ukaniambia utashindwa kutafuta hata vijisenti fulani. Na kuna sehemu za second hand vitabu, there are ways to get around it. And ebooks, yeah, like I said, they're more convenient. Sometimes you get them cheaper. Lakini tayari kuna ile kwamba kuna screen. And the effects of screen, that's a whole other conversation that we won't get into. But we all know them. And the relationship kids have with them vary from household to household. Kuna wengine ambao labda wana limits and they understand that, but kuna wengine it's becoming more an addiction to screens, and that's with adults pia. Kwa hiyo, yeah. It's just, and so it's nice to just put your screens down. Like right now, it's just kila mtu ashika kitabu. Sisi nyumbani kwetu ndio tunafanya hivyo. Tunasema okay, kila mtu kitabu. Na hapa kati tulikata kabisa tukasema msiposoma hiki na hiki, lakini we had to make it into sort of like a challenge. And yes, my boys do love to read, lakini bado mimi, they called me out the other day. They're like, Mama, you're on your phone. Nikamwambia nasoma kitabu. Kaniambia, but you tell us haturuhusiwi kusoma.
Sasa pale
nisameheni. Nikamwambia okay. Nikaenda nikatafute kitabu ambacho nikakishika mkononi, na kweli tukakaa zetu nusu saa yetu tukasoma. Tutaka kushare baada ya kusoma, walishare alafu tukaendelea. Lakini it's true. Sometimes you don't think about it, and you, as a parent, you can put all these things and then all of a sudden it's like, oh wait, you're on your screen. Why are you allowed to? So yeah.
Yani mimi nimependa yale madini ya uwezungumza pale, kwanza kuwazungumzisha watoto lugha ya nyumbani, kuwazungumzisha lugha ya nyumbani na hapo sasa ulivyozungumzia hiyo ya kukata. Maana nilikuuliza specific question pale kwamba bwana tufanyeje, lakini umeyatoa separate madini, lakini hiyo dini nimelipenda hilo ya kwamba kupunguza screen time. It's a challenge. It's a challenge na ambayo inabidi wazazi wawe involve katika hiyo process ili kuwasaidia vijana. Mimi nimeenjoy sana Gerald.
Sasa yani dada Maria Biswalo, japokuwa hujatuambia jina lako la mwisho lina maana nini, this for the next time.
Nitaweka kwenye bio, ngoja nitafute.
But this was really, really amazing. I learned so much about so many different things, culture preservation through literature, mambo ya kuwa na characters that speak for your identity, vitu kama vile how to overcome paralysis, analysis, vitu kama vile learning methods that's suitable for an individual. So all these things are really, really amazing that they tap into what we really usually talk about here at TheSHIP. So really, it was wonderful to have you on the show. And we really hope you can come back again once you have your next book, and we can hear some more about the Pendo and some of the, I guess, evolution that is gonna come along with that. Na tungependa kusema kwamba for future episodes, please subscribe to our social media. That is jiunge, tufuate kwenye mitandao ya kijamii, na pia vile feel free to suggest a mentor to appear on a future show at theship.cast@gmail.com. And then till in the future later, ciao, ciao.
Ciao, ciao. Thank you very much, Dada.
Bye. Asante sana sana sana.